Wake up. Hello. Have you got a vehicle where you're trying to charge up the leisure battery, and what you've done is you've installed something like this, a split charge relay, and this device here doesn't seem to be charging up your leisure battery as you would expect. I bought one of these devices and put it onto a Transit Connect van, and it worked fine. And what this device basically does is that when your vehicle turns on and your alternator starts spinning up and pushes out the constant amperage of a standard alternator, this device would pick up the voltage change, and then what it would do is through a fuse it would then switch this on, this relay, connect the electricity through another fuse, and then finally to the leisure battery. And the leisure battery would be grounded through the negative point to the chassis, or come all the way back to the starter battery, creating a loop. And what that would do is allow the leisure battery to pick up that amperage and charge itself. There's also a negative point on here which needed to be grounded, that little bit there. Now this device, it worked really fine for me when I was in a Transit Connect, very simple, but unfortunately it's not working on this Sprinter van, and the reason why is because this Sprinter van, like many modern vehicles nowadays, has got a Euro 6 engine, and in that Euro 6 engine is something called a smart alternator. Now the smart alternator will adjust its amperage depending on whether the vehicle actually kind of needs it. So it's greener for the environment, doesn't push out as many emissions, but unfortunately your battery, your leisure battery, probably won't charge as quick as it should do, because your smart alternator is adjusting its amperage and it's not designed for charging up a leisure battery. So I found that my leisure battery was pretty more or less depleting, or I was at least using more than what I was able to put into it. So that smart charger that I just this here, this split charger that I used, this just wasn't working for that house battery. So I needed something else called a DC to DC charger, and it's difficult to find out information about this on the internet. But here's one that I've bought, and as you can see, it's bigger, it's far more complicated, and that's because it does quite a lot of extra things. But if you've got a smart alternator, you basically need one of these DC to DC chargers, and I was going to buy a Renogy one which looked very simplistic in design, but I've gone with this Sterling one here. And what I'm going to do is do a video on how this all works, and a bit more on how this device works, and a review on it. But basically a smart alternator needs one of these devices, a DC to DC charger, because this device will trick the smart alternator to spin up more and push out more amperage that's needed in order to charge your battery on the other side. But it's also really good because all these DC to DC chargers tend to do like the charging cycle, so it will do a bulk charge, absorption, conditioning and float charging cycle on there, so it will keep the health of your battery, you know, like you'd have a solar panel connected. You know, your batteries will be topped up to, you know, like 100% or what have you, but there's really a lot of electronic gizmos that go into this to keep your battery in good health, so that is a good thing about it. This one pumps out about 60 amps, 60 to 80 amps I think, so it should charge the battery, you know, quite quickly. I've got a 100 amp AGM battery, and with AGMs you can only really let them go down to half the level, so it's only really 50 amps that it's got to charge, and because this is 60 amp output, in theory it should charge the battery within an hour of driving, or an hour on idle. So yeah, that's the theory, I guess, behind the two different types of charging devices. But what I'm going to do is go through more information on how to connect this now. Holy, holy is he. amazing. Earl Grey, the best kind of grey. Okay, so I'm going to go through quickly how to wire up this DC to DC charger. So what we have is we have basically the starter battery. We have a cable coming from the starter battery that's able to support, I would say, probably about 100 to 150 amps to a fuse, and then from the fuse into the input here, and then that will be used by the Stirling device to send electricity to the output. The output would go to the positive terminal of your laser battery, but in between there you would have a fuse. Then what we have is we have this negative cable here, which would go all the way to the negative point of your starter battery. It needs to be a direct cable according to the manual, otherwise it can't do the calculations that it's needed effectively to be able to charge your battery. You can't really just plug it directly into the chassis. On this side we've got a few different little connectors, and we have here a battery temperature sensor which is needed on your battery. So you'd connect this onto your terminal of your battery, and then the other side of the cable you would connect into this battery temperature sensor, and that is useful because the device, say if you was using an AGM battery like what I've got, it would change the voltage and amperage to what's needed dependent on the temperature of the battery to effectively charge it. It's very important as well for lithium batteries, because you shouldn't charge lithium batteries if the temperature goes to freezing point. So I have a feeling that this Stirling device will accommodate that and basically not break your lithium batteries, which is something that I've done before on a power drill, thankfully not on a leisure battery. So yeah, I've broken a lithium battery on a power drill because I was charging it when it was below 0 degrees. The other connectors on here is I've got a remote voltage sensor, which I don't think I need to use because this device is going to be so close to my leisure battery, but if it was further away you would really connect that, so again it's able to do its calculations that it needs. The ignition feed is, I am going to need to do that, and the reason why you need to do an ignition feed is if you've got a Euro 6 engine and you're planning on charging your leisure battery by idling the engine, which is what I'm going to be doing quite a bit because sometimes I don't drive very far. So to do that you're going to need a cable, and you're going to need to connect one side of the cable to somewhere on the vehicle which will go live when the actual engine turns on or the ignition turns on. The other side then is going to plug into here, and that can be an issue because you might have to, like I've got to, take this cable from one side of the van to the other side of the van, but I'm going to go through how to do that. So yeah, I think that's about it really. The rest of it is, everything's important, but it's not all that important for me. And then I'll go through how to use this device once I've got it all wired up and give a review on it. So my van is an absolute mess, but to cut the cable I'm using a pair of these. I've misplaced my cable cutter and my clamper, so I'm just doing this really survival mode. So I'm going to basically strip this cable here using a Stanley. So I'll just show you that now. pick an appropriate connector. And these things, I've got a few of these spare. Okay, so this is a heat sleeve, and what we can do is just put this over the top of the cable that I've just cut up. And the idea is, what I'm going to do is clamp this terminal connector onto the cable, which I'll show you in a minute, and then once that's clamped, I'm going to slide this up and, using a bit of heat this, and it will melt and create the perfect sort of sleeve for it. If you haven't got a sleeve, you can just use masking tape, to be honest, as long as you do cover everything up. I'm going to be doing this the professional way, using a chisel and a hammer. Do the other side. Okay, and then with a lighter just heat that, and that's your connection done. Okay, I've got half an hour to put in this ignition feed, so I'm hoping that I can actually get it in within that time. I've already got a cable, it looks like, just here, this dedicated negative cable that I was talking about that goes to the starter battery, so I'm going to try and squeeze down the side of that and take my ignition feed all the way over to the fuse box that I was showing you earlier. So I'm going to get on with that. See if I can go the other way. Doesn't seem to be working. Here I am under the vehicle. Oh, I've got two cables going up. Surely I can get up one of them. It would make sense that I use the red one. I can't get up that one. Oh, what's going to happen? Yeah, amazing. That's good news. Oh, she blows, Captain. Just make sure I've got quite a bit of excess on that. This. I'm using one of these cable tie mounts to attach the cable to make it more secure, which is okay for me because the bottom of my van is fiberglass, but obviously you don't want to be drilling holes into a metal van. Okay, so I'm just going to go through how to find a live feed now. So for this, I'm using a multimeter. The reason why I'm using that is because there is another device that you can use, but I like a multimeter because there's lots of different other tests that you can do with it. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to take a reading to find an ignition feed, and what we're looking for is that when we turn on the multimeter, and here I've got it at 20 DC volts, we're really looking for this multimeter here to change to a reading like this. I'll show you an example. So if I take this and do my little test, we end up with, you see it's changing to about 12 volts. So that's really what we're looking for. Now here I'm at the fuse panel, and on this fuse panel here we have really two different kind of states of these fuses, and that is that you've got a constant feed, which is electricity constantly going through these fuses, or you've got a switched feed. So that's when I do something on the vehicle and then all of a sudden the electricity is going through the fuse. Now there's two prongs on these fuses, and if I connect these two up like this, regardless of the state, I'm not going to get a good reading on here, and that's because really what we're trying to do is measure the pressure or voltage in the fuse, and unfortunately when you do that you're not going to get the reading of the pressure or voltage that you're looking for, because there's a flow of current going through the fuse already. So what we need to do is kind of break the circuit, and the way that we do that is we put one prong onto the actual fuse itself and the other prong onto an earthing point. Now good earthing points on a vehicle is this bit here, so what we can do is just put the negative on here, then using the positive go through all of the fuses and check what the multimeter reading is. So I'm going to do that now. Let's check all these and look at the reading. And this is with the ignition off. And what I'm doing is I'm just trying to see which one of these has got a live connection on there. And it doesn't take me long. And what I've discovered is that these two here, that is fuse 4 and 7, they don't have electricity going through them. So it means that all of these here are all constant, these two are not. So I'm trying to get an ignition feed, so these two are candidates for an ignition feed when I turn the key. So what I do is I turn the key, and there's 4 states to the key really. There's off, which is what it is at the moment. There's the next one for when you want like the radio. There's the next one which really is like the ignition feed that I'm looking for, because usually what happens is people go to the next stage to use the starter motor. So there's 4 stages really. Off, I call it radio. The ignition feed that I'm looking for, and when I start the engine. So I'm now going to go to the second stage, the radio one, and just go and check those two again. So looking at the multimeter, they're both off. So I go to the next step, just turn the key a little bit more, and if I do that, yep, there's electricity going through these. So that now means that I know that they are my ignition live feeds, and I can use a fuse tap to connect into one of these and use that there. Now, according to the workshop manual, fuse 5 is the EGS circuit and fuse 7 is the ESM electric selector level module. Now I don't know what any of that means. So I don't know if it's good putting in a live feed on there. It should be alright if you use a fuse tap, but there is a better way, and that is that if you've got a Sprinter van, what I've found is that there's another area in which you can connect, which is just here at the back of the seat. There's this bit here that you can flip up, And when I did the same test on this bit here, this bit happens to be a ignition feed, and what we can do is unbolt this and using an outlet connect to that. You'll have to put your own fuse on, but this bit of this area here is quite good for an ignition feed. This one here seems to be on all the time, and I'm not sure what this one does, but you would need to test this yourself, you know, to make sure it will work in your situation. But I kind of like that, because although we've identified an ignition feed on a fuse, doesn't mean that it's going to be on all the time during ignition. There could be other computer components which maybe turn these devices off, I'm not sure. But fortunately for me, that ignition feed that I've just shown you at the back of the van, someone's already connected a fuse holder for me, and this is for the chiller component on this van, because it's a fridge van. So what I can do is place my fuse tap in here, and this is the ignition feed that I'm going to be using. Okay, so I wired it all up, and this is what I've got. When I turn on the engine, I end up with this alarm, and the reason why is because we've got a low volt out error code. And what that is that when I was looking at the wiring diagram, it turned out that I needed a negative going from the battery to the starter battery, and I didn't think that I needed that, but of course I do, because the electricity needs to go in a complete loop back to the starter battery. So I've had to put in another negative cable to get around that situation. The instructions say therefore that you need a negative cable going from the DC charger to the negative of the starter battery, and a negative cable going from the negative of the auxiliary battery to the negative of the starter battery. And the instructions say that they should be direct connections. You shouldn't be going through the chassis for optimal performance. It does say in there that they could be common, so you might get away with linking them together, but the diagram in the instruction book says that you should have a direct connection to the starter battery, and that's what I've done, which means that I've had to get underneath the van and put in another cable just to go from the negative of the auxiliary battery to the negative of the starter battery. So whilst I'm here, just something that I'd like to tell you, which is more important than anything that I've said up to now, so you really need to listen to this bit. Okay, Jesus is God as a man, and he came here 2,000 years ago, and it turned out that people didn't like Jesus, they didn't like God, because they put him on a cross and they crucified him, and he died a painful, horrible death and rose again 3 days later, which is how we, why we celebrate Easter. And the reason why he rose again from the dead is to prove, his divinity, but also to give us hope that if we trust and believe in his sacrifice that he did on the cross, his death on the cross, then that can be a payment for all of our sin. And if we trust in that payment, repent and turn to God and follow him, then he offers us the promise of eternal life. Just as he rose from the dead, so will we, for those that trust in him. And I used to be an atheist, but when I found Christ, when I found Jesus, he has so much enhanced my life, and I can only recommend that you go and find him for yourself, which you can do by subscribing to this channel and really just reading the Bible, because the Bible is where it's at. The New Testament is where it's at. So please do read your Bible, go and get a Bible. They're cheap as chips. If you go to a local church, they'll give you one. And find people that will love you, that are Christians, definitely. Go and find yourself a good church full of love. Hiya.